I'm Amy Frampton. As Anna mentioned, I'm the head of marketing at Bamboo HR. I've been at Bamboo about 2.5 years. I'm just realizing I'm so glad I don't have exactly the same blouse on. I almost wore that this morning. Awkward. But I've been at Bamboo just about 2.5 years, moved down to Utah for this role and love being a part of the Silicon Slopes. Before I came to Bamboo, I was at a company called Smartsheet. And prior to that, at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Vulcan, which is Paul Allen's holding company. And before that, I spent about 10 years at Microsoft. And my passion is really around running great teams. I'm really grateful for the team I have. And so I'm excited to talk about that today.
Awesome. So named Brian Crofts. And so I've been at Bamboo for 2.5 months. So 2.5 years, 2.5 months. I've been in Silicon Slopes now or in Utah for about a year. Before that, been the CPO at other companies like Audit Board, Pendo, namely. And then I spent about 12 years at Intuit. So been in product kind of the whole time and thrilled to be not only at Silicon Slopes, but at Bamboo HR. So
we're glad to have you. So today we're going to talk about 3 principles that as we talked about, what do we think about, what are our leadership principles, what really matters? And it's such an interesting time. Bamboo itself has grown a ton. When I joined 2.5 years ago, we were just under 500. We're over 1,200 now. But, we're not alone. I know for a lot of folks who are here, you're involved in growing companies, remote work is happening. COVID obviously changed a lot of things in terms of the workplace. And so we thought, how can we distill this down to 3 things that we think would be helpful for people as they think about their leadership? And so the first principle is, if I can get the slides to change, there we go, accountability and trust. And it was funny, as I was looking at these this morning again, I thought, wouldn't it be so nice if we could just say accountability and trust? Yeah, let's do that, right? We want high accountability, high trust. Who wants that? Raise your hand. Yeah, I wish it was that easy. But as I think about accountability and trust, you first have to start with this establishing trust with your team. I've been at Bamboo 2.5 years. You've got 2.5 months. But whether you've been there a long time, at wherever you are, or a short time, you have to establish trust with your team first. And for me, one of those things was really understanding my willingness for risk and willingness for failure. Because as a marketing leader, I'm often saying to people, go test things. It's okay if you fail. You'll be fine. And if they don't trust you and you don't have that relationship, that's a really hard thing to take on.
Yeah, I mean, and you're really talking about psychological safety, right? Like the ability or the encouragement to take on risk. And what's interesting, like I think what we've seen is that you really have to define it and talk about it, because if you don't, people might not know what it means, and they might be actually scared to take risks and fail because in their previous experiences, it's like, don't mess this up.
That's exactly right. One thing I did with my team was I said, hey, we're going to spend a certain percent of the budget on tests. And that means they can totally be stinkers. Like they can fail big time. But we're going to feel okay, and we're going to make a mutual commitment on these marketing activities. We know they're going to be tests. And so sometimes tests fail, and that's okay. Yeah. And just defining that really helped.
Absolutely.
So we did that. I know I've got this great picture of you playing basketball here.
This is not me playing basketball. Actually, the funny thing was I'm that guy, that scared guy over in the left. No, I'm not. No, but I wanted to tell a story about basketball, and I couldn't find. I know to the disappointment of Amy, I could not find an old picture of me playing basketball. But back in high school, I had this really unique experience where I was, and this part is not unique. But the lesson learned from it is pretty cool, which is I was playing on 2 different teams at the exact same time. Like a lot of people, they play high school and they play club. Well, what was cool about this is that it was basically the same team. I think maybe 1 or 2 different people. And so it was the same team, same starting 5, but different coaches. And so what we didn't know is that we had a nice A/B test going on. What was interesting is one team thrived. And it was actually the high school team. We thrived. We did really well. Again, same players under a particular coach. And on the club team, again, mostly the same team, same starting five, and I think we were less than 500. We were a losing team, and at the time, I didn't really think much about that. But now, as I reflect and kind of go, well, what's the difference between the two teams? And the only difference was the coach. It's the only difference. And as we thought about those coaches, and I think back to him now, one was really about letting us play freely, making basically playing to win. And if we made a couple mistakes, we kept playing. The other coach, and by the way, the other coach, when I think about him, is so funny because he was the most creative cursor I've ever heard. Like the combinations of
That's a high bar in
it's
Utah.
a high bar.
It is.
It's a high bar. And so, but man, as soon as we made a mistake, he would pull us out of the game. So what happened? We weren't loose. We were playing tight. We were playing not to get pulled out. We were playing. We were playing to not get pulled out, to not make mistakes, because we knew this minute we made a mistake, we were pulled out and we were chewed out. We yelled curses, and you were like, "Dang it, I just want to play." And so, obviously, at the time, we weren't thinking and talking about that a lot. But now, as I reflect, it was this great understanding of, wow, the coach really does determine kind of the environment in which we play. And in the club team, it was not okay to fail. It was zero tolerance. And the other team, it was playing. So we were playing not to lose, not to make mistakes on the club team. On the high school team, we were playing to win. We were playing loose and we were having fun. And so it really starts to ask the question, like, what kind of manager are you? Do you create that psychological safety where it's okay to fail?
What position did you play?
I was a small forward,
Small.
believe it or not. Yeah, very small.
I believe it. So, as you think about accountability, I love that. What kind of coach do you want to be? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do, for those of you that were at the main stage yesterday, Brad Rencher, our CEO at Bamboo, talked about Team One, and something that we think a lot about at Bamboo is our accountability to each other. So my team and I definitely have accountabilities to each other. We work to trust each other. We understand each other's tolerance for risk, the company's tolerance for risk. All of that is really, really important. But then with Brian and I and our colleagues, some of who are here today, we also think of ourselves as Team One, and we try to put on that Team One hat and think about the business across the board. And at least from my experience so far, you're 2.5 months into it, that also drives accountability. We're accountable to each other. We're accountable to the business. And so I can't only wear my marketing hat, as colorful and wonderful as it is, I also wear my Team One hat, and that drives accountability.
Yeah, and it's like, how does that show up, right? In whatever meeting that we're in, if we're talking about sales and marketing, it doesn't mean that I can tune out, right? It means that I need to be actively
The most
engaged
important topic.
in the business. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's kind of it's not the most exciting.
It is so exciting.
Anyways, so I think Team One is a really cool concept, but the fundamental, like what you're talking about, is creating the right environment and holding people accountable, and creating that safe space to play.
It is. So, as when I go to talks like this, I always want a good takeaway. And so what I would encourage you, if you came to this session, you're thinking about these sorts of things, think about what kind of coach and colleague do you want to be? Who, as you walk away, what kind of coach do you want to be? What's your tolerance for risk? How do you want to show up in an accountable way that builds trust?
How good are you at cursing?
How good are you at cursing?
Are you creative cursor?
It is, for me, it is a skill set. It is a skill set.
All right. So let's go on to principle number 2. And this is, and I love this one because I still feel like I'm learning this one, like learning how to be good at this one, which is recognizing the moment. Taking milestones that we have in the business, personal, professional, and creating a moment out of it. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But for me, when I think about celebrating and creating moments, I think in my past, I haven't been that great at it. I when I see a bunch of people celebrating like a first down or a touchdown, I'm like, guys, game's not over. Game's not like we still haven't won. We got to keep going. And I think I think that's not maybe the best place to be. The best place is to really like to take time out and to figure out what are those times where you want to create moments. And I think, why is that important? And I think really it's two things. Number one, it's actually really important in change management to kind of take a moment to reflect on it, whether it's a win, whether it's a loss. It's good to talk about it. And then I think the second thing, and this is probably even more important, is that in the workplace, we want to help our teams create stories. And so when we have a big win or we have a loss, like creating a moment out of that enables people to kind of go home or talk to colleagues or talk to their friends and tell them a story. Talk about an exciting thing that just happened at work. Talk about how they overcome this challenge and turn it into something positive. And if we don't take those kind of pause and take moment and reflect on those, then we kind of miss that opportunity and we don't help people create their story or the story that happens at work, which is again a big part of culture. What stories are people telling about? Are they talking about just the wins? Are they talking about how they're growing and developing? And so I think really pausing and recognizing a moment, I think, is critical for culture, change management, and just overall satisfaction in the workplace.
And it's hard to do because we're all moving fast.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to think, oh, I need to stop for a moment. And I either need to say, let's help you tell the story about why this was successful, why it's the new way we're doing things, why it matters, or here's some feedback that, may be hard to discuss, but is worth taking the moment around.
Yeah. Like, for example, like in the product world, we build roadmaps and we commit to things, to the business of things we want to build. And there's times that we're not hitting what we said we're going to do. And so what's important, like the moment there, it's not a big moment, but it's a mini moment of why are we red? Why did we not accomplish what we said we were going to accomplish? And so not only does it create kind of this cadence of accountability, but it also gives people an opportunity to share what they're learning, right? So we're learning as an organization, we're sharing where we're winning, we're sharing where we're failing, and then you become a learning culture, right? And so it's not just to pause and create moments for the wins, it's also for where we're struggling a little bit, where we read, and giving people the right kind of environment to talk about it and celebrate the learning and not just focus on the failure.
And that's the thing, right? Celebrating the learning. If you are building the right kind of culture, the culture I would look for, you're in a place where it's safe to learn.
Yeah.
I interviewed a gentleman the other day on our podcast at Bamboo called What Happens at Work. And he was talking about the 4 stages of psychological safety. And so it's, do you feel included? Do you feel like you belong is the first stage? And then do you feel like you can learn? Do you feel like you can give feedback? And do you feel like you can have an impact? And so you want to be able to give and receive feedback in the moment so that learning happens and you're getting better and better as you go. One of the things is, as I moved down, I worked the last 20 years before Bamboo in Seattle. And one of the things I talk to my team about a lot is this concept about, and it comes from Radical Candor, for those of you who have read the book, clear is kind. Because I think just as humans, we all want to be seen as nice. And it's really hard to say, hey, Brian, like, you didn't do that right.
It didn't seem hard the other day.
It didn't seem hard the other day. We weren't going to talk about that.
That flowed really easily.
Yeah. Well, I've gotten really good at it because clear is kind. But, as you think about it, it's in some ways easier to just be nice and just not tell the person. But what does that do to your organization? Sometimes it causes passive aggressive behaviors. Sometimes it causes back channeling. Sometimes it has all these effects. And then people aren't learning.
Yeah.
And so I talk to my team a lot about, listen, I'm going to tell you what I really think. And what I think is great about that, and I hope they do too, is if I say that was amazing, or I give them, we celebrate a moment, That's a real moment
Yeah.
because that was awesome.
Yeah,
Eh,
that's a good point. Like moments shouldn't be every day, right?
that's
Like
right.
they are milestones, they are opportunities where the team has learned something important, right? It's not just like let's not be they need to be important.
And they need to be real. And so
Real. Yeah.
sometimes they're learning moments, and that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. We all of us are learning. And if you are building a culture of learning, you're going to have those moments in which you give that feedback. And so clear as kind is a big one for me.
Yeah, and I love thinking about like the difference between like being nice and being kind, right? And like to me being nice is maybe not letting go of an employee, right? Because I want to be nice and I want and maybe this
A little
employee
bit
is
superficial.
yeah, superficial, right? And but maybe the most kind thing to do is to let that person go. Or maybe being nice is to not give feedback or whatever, but kind is that you actually really care and that you're in the Brene Brown quote, you're in the arena, right? You're in the game, you're in the trenches. And so when you celebrate that moment, they know you're right there with them learning. And again, I used to always think this was such like fluff, you know what I mean? Until like just warm and fuzzy stuff until you do it wrong, or until you work in an environment where there's no celebration of moments. There's no moments. It's just go, go, go. And that's not a fun place to work. And it really just stifles creativity and problem solving. And so like this is critical to get right.
Not all of our employees, no matter where you are, and I think for us too, we want to be successful. And if you're not learning, if someone is working on a project that the messaging isn't right, or it's not moving at the speed it needs to, or you're not seeing the results and you don't talk about it, that doesn't actually make the project successful.
Yeah.
It makes the project still unsuccessful, and as an organization, as a team, as humans, we haven't then learned so that we can do better next time, and that's
Yeah.
really what people want.
Well, and I think what you bring up is a good point too, because you don't want to just create moments like in with just one team or in isolation, because then the broader organization is not going to learn, right? So if this team over here fails and learns this great thing, how does the rest of the culture that kind of have that shared consciousness around? So we're learning together, right? And then the hope is like when we learn something, maybe how not to do it this way or that way, that then other teams then don't make that mistake. I mean, definitely that team should not make the mistake, but the hope is the other teams don't make that same mistake.
At Bamboo, we have the oops mail. I don't know if you've seen an oops mail yet,
I have not.
but
No.
when you make a mistake that you're sharing with others on your team and other relevant teams, and I think when we were a little smaller,
I
they went
haven't made
across the
any
whole. You
mistakes
haven't made
yet.
any mistakes.
No,
We talked about that one, but and you just acknowledge it because everyone's going to make mistakes. And so let's learn from them. Let's move on.
yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about is, as I mentioned, I spent 10 years at Microsoft. One of the things culturally at Microsoft was, is there anybody here who's ever worked at Microsoft? Raise your hands. Be proud. Vista, come on, Windows 95. Nobody? Okay.
Zero.
SharePoint.
You're in safe
I know.
territory.
Gosh, I shouldn't have mentioned SharePoint. Nobody wanted to raise their hand. The One of the things at Microsoft was anytime you finished a project, you sent a celebration mail.
Oh, I love those.
A
And the
celebration.
executive pylon.
The executive pylon,
Oh.
great job. Yeah, and they were always beautifully designed, and it took about 3 days after the project. And as I think about recognizing the moment, what I'm sure they're not doing this anymore. I haven't been there for 10 years, but really picking your moments to have that impact on that story is really important.
Yeah, very good. Should we go to the third?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, you're going to do the recap.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, um,
Yeah, I did that feedback.
yeah. So, okay. So this is one to think about, is to call into mind a past moment that you either let slip by or mishandled, and reframe your feedback points as clear as kind lens. And so, just reflect. Take this as an opportunity to reflect on where a missed opportunity, that you could have created the moment, or where you could have had a better clear as kind moment. So again, just another point of reflection as we go through these.
Great. Let's go to the third one. So this is around diversity of voices. And so, diversity is a really important topic in a lot of ways. What we're talking about here is prioritizing diversity of voices in your organization. And so as look to build a team, a leadership team, I look for people that not only have different experiences, but from those experiences, they're bringing different perspectives.
I mean, that's a great way to define diversity, right? Diversity of background, diversity of experiences, different points of view.
And what I find is as we're planning new campaigns or we're planning different activities, I need them to feel trusted, accountable. I need us to have those moments. And then for those diversity of voices, to use all of those things to speak up. And I'll often say, how are we pressure testing this? How are we thinking about
Where am I wrong?
Yeah, where am I wrong is a great question. I was just listening to a podcast the other day, and it was talking about how, as a leader, if you just say, so does that make sense to your team? What are they going to say? They're going to say, yeah, most of the time.
Yeah.
But if you say, tell me where I'm wrong, I want everyone to tell me where I'm wrong, and you're open to that, then you start to get that diversity of voices. I want everyone speaking up because it's how we get better.
By the way, like actually feedback works the same way. There was a study actually done where they measured like neural activity, brain activity when somebody comes up to you and says, "Can I give you feedback?" And they say it's the same kind of neurochemical activity that happens when you say that is the same when you're a woman alone walking down a dark alley and then hear footsteps behind you. And so really, like, that's a scary thing to say, can I give you feedback? Versus if I go to my manager, can I get some feedback? Can you share with me some feedback on this particular thing? Because then you're inviting it, you're welcoming it. It's the same thing as like creating where am I wrong? What's wrong about this versus how is this right? How am I right?
How am I right? That's
Tell
the
me how
question.
I'm right.
Exactly. I'd love to hear about, because you shared with me, how do you think about, as you're building product, what different voices mean to that project?
Yeah, I mean, and again, diversity I think means it means so many things. I think in this context that we're talking, like I love when I'm building a team. First and foremost, it's really important to understand who do I have on the team. Like where do we have strengths and maybe where do we have weaknesses, and then I kind of look at like where do we need to go as a team, where maybe are we light in this area from this perspective or whatever. And so when I think about diversity in this particular case, it's, well, what kind of experience, what kind of diversity of experience do people have? Do they come from B2B? Do they come from B2C? Right? Are they focused on small business? Are they focused on enterprise? Have they worked in different industries? And so that's another way to think about diversity, is diversity of experience, diversity of ideas. One of my favorite things as a product guy is to think about analogs. And so what I love is when somebody comes new to the team and like, oh, we solved this problem, but in a different industry. And so when I think about, again, there's a lot of ways to think about diversity, but when I'm building a team, I'm thinking about diversity of experience as well, just to make sure that we're well-rounded. I mean, when you're working in B2C, you think about design differently than an enterprise B2B. And so again, but it really starts with, where are we strong? Where are we weak? Where do we need more representation? Where are we good? And I think when you do that, like that's another way to really embrace that, but then also give them the platform to share.
Absolutely. I mean, the encouragement to speak up and the trust to do that is so important.
What do you do with your introverted people?
Well, it's interesting because I'm an introvert.
Yes, you are.
I'm
Not.
But I'm married to one. Yeah.
Same.
And one of the things I found is sometimes often our introverts have the most to say, but you have to pause and give the opportunity to speak. Because what I've found, and I don't want to speak for all extroverts or all introverts, we're all different, but is that an extrovert like us will jump into a conversation and kind of plow a path. And if you don't give that space for an introvert, you miss out knowledge, on what people could push
Yeah.
on new perspectives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when you ask questions, leading questions like, "Where am I wrong?" and then pause, that has been really important for me.
Yeah, it's also I've also found like going and maybe collecting notes from people. There people take notes and they think about, or they have to think about it overnight or the next couple of days. And so sometimes when meetings are done, they're not done yet, right? There's people that are thinking about it and they take that problem home. They solve it, right? And then we got to go figure out how to make sure that that voice and that idea is represented.
Yeah, often in hard conversations in particular, if I know I'm talking to someone who likes to process or is introverted, or even if not, but this seems to work every time, is I'll say, "You know what? Let's talk about this again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Think of what you think about this. We don't have to finish this today." And I think that's important. When you were talking about having people from different industries, I was thinking about a hire we just made in marketing at Bamboo in our product marketing team. Actually, he's been with us about a year now, but he comes from Hanes. So he was selling white t-shirts and other white products for Hanes. And when I heard about him, oh, we got this great guy. He's going to be a product marketer. And I come from product marketing. And so I love that. And I was like, great. What's he been selling?
Underwear.
Underwear. I was like, excellent.
I think swag.
Yeah.
Immediately.
You think swag immediately. But the thing for me is you want a diversity of experience and voices in marketing that is thinking about the end customer at all times. And he's fabulous.
Yeah.
Because he's thinking about the end customer at all times.
Yeah, and maybe just to think about talk about another aspect of diversity, is whether it's kind of, if you think about your community and you think about minorities, you think about making sure that you have a different, that it doesn't just all look the same, right? And I think a lot of teams, I think, talk about the challenge of how do we get a more diverse team, like towards the end of the funnel, right? Like looking at the candidates they have versus saying, how do we, if we want to be more diverse, we have to go to the top of the funnel. Where are we recruiting? Where are we creating awareness about the jobs that we have? Is it in the same channels? Is it just through our networks where everybody has the same background? Or is it we're able to branch out to different places and really address that at the top of the funnel versus like just who's coming to interview? So lots of different ways.
Absolutely. And I think, as the takeaway for this one, just think about how you've done the work. It's something we think about regularly. How are you diversifying the voices? Are you getting the pushback? Is your team telling you you're wrong regularly? My team tells me I'm wrong all the time.
You've created a safe environment.
Yes, and I'm wrong a lot. So it works great. And having a team that can tell you that is so important, and you don't want it all coming from one angle.
Awesome. Well, I think so. Before we move to Q&A, we're going to do just a couple of takeaways. So just going to recap. So number one, we talked about this a lot, and I love that it's the first one, is to create psychological safety. It's the number one way to drive innovation, is creating a safe place. Number one, like, again, think about the kind of coach you are, who you want to be. Are you a coach that takes risks? Are you a coach that lets them play? Or is it one mistake and you're out? Optimize for moments of feedback, moments of celebration, moments to tell stories. Pause and celebrate wins. And obviously what we just talked about is curate and diversify teams and solve for it.
So Anna, we'd love to take questions, but we'd also love to hear from people that have had experiences with these things and want to share.
Awesome. Well, that sounds great. We have a few minutes. So to make this easy, I would love, if you have a question, to come down, exercise your legs, and actually meet me at the bottom of the stairs, because it'll be too hard to ask questions in front of this speaker. So please meet me down at the bottom of the stairs. We can take questions, or like Amy said, any examples that people want to share that they're wanting to. Examples. Oh, you got one here. Perfect.
Yeah, I would love to just learn more about how else you can include introverts in conversations. Any additional best practices you'd like to share, and any further expansion would be great.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everyone is here has read the book Quiet. Has everyone read the book Quiet? If you haven't read it, so good. And if you don't like that kind of thing, I would at least recommend listening to her talk, TED Talk, because it talks a little bit about, as a society, what we miss by always rewarding the extrovert in the room that fights to get their idea in, and what we miss by not listening to folks that might be more introverted.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to actually, I think, go talk to individuals that you know in your team are maybe more introverted, maybe more quiet in a group setting, but have great ideas, and to work with them and say, hey, what's a good way to ensure that we get your mind, that we get your ideas, and because I do think it can be a very individual thing. I mean, sometimes it's like, hey, just call me out in a meeting and then I'll share. Or maybe it's, hey, follow up in a couple, the next day or the next morning. But I think it can be very individualized. And I think, so knowing your team, knowing your people, I think is a big thing.
One of the things that I've encouraged my team to do is, it's funny because we're not together as much as we used to be as humans, and it's something I miss. But there are tools. There's the raise the hand tool, and I think that is one way to allow for folks who might not jump into a conversation, um, to use those tools and say, "Hey, I've got something to say." I also think pausing and asking people just straight out, as Brian said, what's the best way? Because we want your opinion, and just tell us how to do that in the best way, because otherwise we're really missing out.
Awesome. Thank you. We got another question here.
I really appreciated what you guys are talking about, especially about the culture of safety. And I think when it comes to teams, I think it can make sense, but I'm thinking for solopreneurs or even individuals within a team, sometimes I feel like that challenge of creating a culture of safety with yourself, you're like, oh crap, I suck, and you start creatively swearing at yourself. Where is that balance between being safe and like, oh no, you're okay, and accountability? Like if you're too easy on yourself and you keep sliding and you lose that accountability, you don't kind of meet those milestones. But if you're too hard on yourself, you create that bad culture. Where's that balance for individuals and maybe even for teams as well?
Well, for me, it's I guess a couple thoughts come to mind. One is, I'm a big believer in acknowledging when you make mistakes, because I think that builds trust with the team, and we all make mistakes, and so acknowledging, hey, I was wrong on that. That was not what we should have done, and that helps others then feel safe to do the same thing. But I think for me, when I look at, hey, I want my team, and I have very, high expectations for my team in terms of accountability and doing great work. And our mission is set people free to do great work. And I want my team doing that great work. I want our customers to be able to do that. A lot of it is about if they're learning. So if they take accountability for their own learning, so that test didn't go well, that campaign didn't go well, that didn't work. Well, if you rinse and repeat, then you're safe to fail, but you're not holding accountability. If you're learning from that and acting on that learning, then you're showing you're accountable for your results. And that to me is the balance. And it is a hard balance, right? Because you want people to feel like they can, make mistakes. We're all going to do that. We're all going to learn. But at the same time, we've got to execute. And so seeing people execute on the learning is really important to me.
Yeah, I mean, I plus one to everything Amy said. I also think, I mean, it's a really, really good question, right? Because especially when you're thinking of yourself, right? Like, and being critical on yourself. But to me, the most important thing, and it's the thing I think we led with, which is trust. And so do the people that work for you on your team, do they believe and trust your intentions? And so when because if they do, when you're direct and you're kind, not just nice, but you're direct, they know that it's coming, the intentions behind it are good. And I think with ourselves, that's probably a more tricky one, right? A lot of us deal with like shame and like, I could do better than that. But I think we just need to keep reflecting and say, like if I was an employee of me, right? Like like, how would I treat that employee? And you're like, you'd probably be a lot more kind, a lot more direct, and you'd give yourself that space. So I love the question because I think we can be kinder to ourselves. I think we can give ourselves a break a little bit. But then to be in a culture where that's celebrated and accepted, I think is positive. And I think as an individual, if you're sitting there reflecting, going, "What did I learn from that? How do I get better?" I think you're in a good, healthy space.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, one more question here.
Awesome. Okay. So I kind of wanted to ask more about your question with diversity. So, kind of background, I'm a co president of an interfaith student council at UVU, where we work to create relationships across lines of like your spiritual, secular, religious identity. And that's a really important part of diversity, is like bringing your whole self, religious, non religious, whatever that might look like for you. And so I was curious as to how you create spaces where people can bring that aspect of themselves to the community you're trying to create.
Great question.
It's funny because like I don't ever want to bring my whole self, because you don't want the whole self of me. I come with some baggage, but no, it's a really good question. I mean, I think it's more of like we need to give people the comfort and the safety to bring them, if they whatever they want to bring. If they want to bring their whole self, bring their whole self. But I do think it does kind of this is where leadership is so important, because the leader does set the tone. And so at times when you're self-deprecating, or when you're talking about something that's really important to you, I think that's great. I think the only thing that I try to make sure, like, is to not create kind of factions and create groups and interest groups and start to divide up the company that way, but to celebrate that we're all different. We all bring a lot of uniqueness and diversity, and we should celebrate that. But I think it's really creating the environment for people to choose what do they want to bring. And to me, that's the difference between a good and healthy environment and one that's you're not sure what to do, or you don't feel like you can bring your whole self.
I think to your point about the leader sets the tone, right? And it brought to mind, here's something I did that was dumb. So when I was interviewing for this job, I was talking to one of the great founders of Silicon Slopes, Ryan Sanders, founder of Bamboo HR. And I remember him saying to me, and we were on a video call, and I was actually at my current office, place of work, back when we were all in the office all the time, had my door shut. And he said to me, "What would your team say that you are?" And I said, "Well, honestly, they'd probably say I was a total goofball," because we had just been out doing something kind of goofy as a team. And I went home from that interview that day, and I was like, "God, I'm never getting that job." I just told him, like, he asked me, I could have said strategic. I could,
You went with goofy.
big thinker, and I went with goofy. Yeah. Luckily, he didn't hold it against me. But I do think that by being your whole self, whatever that means to you, because it means different things to different people, being yourself at work and trusting your team with that allows your team then to feel the same. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, awesome. All right, we have time for one more question.
Thank you for joining us today. My question has to do with transparency. And as a leader, sometimes I've found myself being too transparent and sometimes not transparent enough to establish the trust within my organization. Can you address that whole issue?
That's a great question. Do you want to start?
Sure. Because you're right. I mean, you can go too far, right? And to me, it's an active discussion that I have with myself around, what am I going to share? You want to give people, I think the most important thing in terms of transparency is giving people context for decisions. And so when it comes to giving context for decisions, that's where I think you want to be super, super transparent. Why are we doing it this way? Why does this matter to the company? Why did we change this thing that we thought was great and now we've decided isn't great? That, in terms of change management, context is where I try to really lean in on transparency.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think to me, it kind of goes back to the word trust. And, and others on my team have heard me say or define like trust in the workplace and other places. Like trust is gained, by making and keeping commitments over time. And so when I have individuals on my team that where I feel that trust, where they've made and commitments over time, like I'm going to be more transparent with that person. But I would say I do err on the side of transparency for that exact reason, which is like context is king. Like understanding kind of the why we're doing something is really important. But of course, as leaders, you can't always share everything. And so as leaders, you have to get comfortable being misunderstood. You have to be comfortable with being lonely with some information. And so I think transparency as a whole is a great thing. And I think what's interesting about transparency is that the workforce, our teams, our employees, they don't just want it, they demand it. And so it's really important, I think, to reconcile what you believe is the right amount. But I do think it can be individual. I do like to err on the side of sharing more, especially if it's in context to a decision or something. But again, great question.
I mean, sometimes with transparency, if you can't or shouldn't share the context, I think it's okay to say, that's not something I think is appropriate to share if it's about another human involved, that sort of thing. And hey, I want to be transparent with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like draw the lines, right? Like for example, there is company information, financial information, like we're not going to share, right? And so we've drawn some hard lines. And I think if you're clear about those hard lines, then you have the freedom to kind of be transparent at different levels for other things. So I think it's great. It's like defining what we will not share and defining what I will, and then being flexible.
People respect that.
People respect that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for coming to this culture chat or ethics
Thanks,
track.
everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's been great. Give it up for Amy and Brian.
Thank you.